Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, elevating your impact through valuable insights and conversations about leadership. Welcome back to another episode of the McCoy Leadership Podcast, and today we have Walter Dusseldorp with us. Walter is the Dutch mentor, and he brings a wealth of knowledge and experience in personal development and mentorship. Walter, thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you ended up becoming the Dutch mentor and how you got there?
Well, good day to you and to your audience, and it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to having a great conversation about leadership. So I really have to go back. Obviously, the Dutch mentor. The first question is, are you really from Holland? Yes, I am. I came to the United States in 1988. And of course, you don't become a mentor by just coming to America and having no baseline experiences. So where I got started is really falling in love with healthcare early on as a child by chasing ambulances in my local hometown and listening to airplanes flying and helicopters flying overhead. That really took me on a journey of finding my true love and passion. I came to America. Initially, I was on track to go to medical school, but then I took a bit of a sidetrack. I got a little distracted, so to say, as a teenager. But I found my love in paramedicine. And as I did that for the first, 10 years, I went back to school and I really said to myself, listen, taking care of a patient one at a time is phenomenal. But I think being able to guide and provide leadership to people who take care of patients, you can impact more lives. And that's really how my journey started, initially in paramedicine and then as a flight paramedic. And then later on, I shifted into a hospital and healthcare environment, a healthcare executive, all the way up to the C-suite into an academic healthcare system in New York City, where I had the great pleasure of working with lots of very talented people and develop a program called Leadership Power. And since then, in 2021, post-COVID, I decided to go out on my own and really develop the program to focus on emerging leaders across different industries, and really had refined what leadership power was around. One, self-awareness and self-development. Two is about learning how to solve problems with causes. And three, how to use all of these things to building high-performance teams. I'm sure we'll dive into that. So that's where I am today. Just by a fun fact, I'm also a commercial helicopter pilot and a flight instructor for helicopter and airplanes. So the love of aviation goes well with all those things I talked about leadership as well.
Awesome. I find that interesting. Maybe you can swing down here and pick me up one day and we'll go for a little trip. So,
sounds like a plan to me.
So I do find it interesting. You hit on one thing there that you really do focus on emerging leaders and giving them the skills that they need. And I'm just curious, why focus on emerging leaders as opposed to focus on the folks that have been doing what they're doing for 20 years and maybe not having great success?
Yeah. So really two reasons. One is that I found that when you work with the CEO, they often very set in their ways. And I do work with CEOs and I do enjoy that as well because it is, you go to different twists and turns. But I really have found the opportunity with the emerging leader. And the reason why that is really twofold. One, especially in healthcare, but this goes across the board. Most people who are high performing and have high potential who are in a technical role are promoted into leadership. The problem is that when they go from doing to leading, they don't really get a robust, support system around them in order to become highly effective leaders. So what they end up doing by default, they continue to do and lead a little bit. And that leads to great frustration for them in the role, but also frustration with people that they lead. And I call that they get trapped into this valley of despair. And it goes back to a little bit to the conversation we had earlier, is that, people go to their bachelor's and master's degree, but sadly they are not taught how to become highly effective leaders in those programs. So they are very worldly on a variety of topics. They come out of school, but they still don't know what it is to lead. So I think the greatest opportunity is to go to the pool of emerging leaders that goes from associate directors or managers all the way up to the AVP level. Those are the folks who need the greatest support on a daily, weekly basis. And my philosophy is very different than most mentors or coaches in order to be able to have a material, sustainable impact on their growth and their journey. And of course, as the CEO would be interested in, how does that add performance to our facilities?
So I think it's fascinating that over the years I've been involved in multiple apprenticeship programs, and I have said for years that every single pathway that's out there should have an apprenticeship with it. And even think about a doctor. A doctor doesn't go to college and get out, after getting out of medical school and start performing surgeries. They have to spend a little bit of time watching and seeing and getting, some of those skills that they're going to need to be able to make or do those surgeries on people. So I think it's interesting that we have kind of come back to that idea of mentorship more and more over the past several years. But the reality is that probably still one of the best things in the world, which is mentorship, is, apprenticing under somebody. You want to be a leader, it would be great to find another leader to apprentice under. So I find that very fascinating. So what does, and you kind of touched on it there, but what is your definition of leadership? And you said your perspective is much different than what everybody else is. What makes your perspective so much different than what is typically practiced?
So what we are seeing, I'll start over the statistics. So 95% of all executive leaders believe that leadership development is key to the success of the organization. Sadly, only 5% of those take meaningful action of developing leaders within the organization. And by default, many leaders say, well, I am their coach, I am their mentor, I meet with them, I provide leadership development. In reality, they spend a small fraction of their time with them, which is not enough and certainly not sustainable to give the new leader the opportunity to truly develop. So I'm of the belief that leadership development should start from the day they are hired, right? It should be part of the hiring process and make sure that you have the right candidate going in, and that candidate is then properly supported over a 6 to 12 month period of time so they can accelerate through their growth period. Now, if it is an internal candidate or external candidate, but integrating into the culture, really understanding and having this opportunity to be in a safe zone of asking questions and getting the support on a weekly basis during weekly mentoring sessions, 30 minutes at a time, and have access to this mentor throughout the week on an as-needed basis to be able to make decisions and to continue to grow and develop. So that is very different what the philosophy is of people being, going to a coaching environment where people might have an exposure once a month to a coach that might or might not have experience in the industry that you're working in. They ask good questions, they're good listeners, and they certainly can give insightful information. But the doing piece coming out of it is not really the right instrument, the right approach, in my opinion. So action-based learning, behavioral learning is where the opportunity is. That's what we need to shift to. So what we are traditionally seeing today is that healthcare or any organization will provide development opportunities by taking online modules. But that's good. Or send you to a webinar, or send you to a conference. The problem is that none of that is sticky, meaning that they will learn something in the moment, but by Monday morning they have forgotten all about it because it's not actionable. So the adult learner does best when you take in information and you take action. You measure those actions and you become good at it over a period of time. And if you then have an accountability buddy or a mentor who can help you become self-accountable, you can start seeing the shift from becoming low competency to high proficiency as a leader.
So I think you touched on it there, but being able to, and many times, whether it's the CEO, the manager, as you said, they say they are the mentor or the trainer, and that they're going to do that work. And I often tell folks when they're getting ready to hire, and whoever is hiring for that position, the number one question that I tell them to ask themselves is when you're deciding what skills you're looking for. Many times I hear, well, as long as they have these couple of skills, I can teach them everything else. And so my question is, how much time are you going to devote to that? So my question to you is, how many times do you see it fail because they do create a plan, or they have a plan in their mind, but they actually are not able to. They get busy with other things. Something happens. There's an issue within the business, and all of a sudden now they're not paying attention to that person. How many times do you see it fail when they don't adhere to the plan?
95% of the time, people fail to deliver what they were set to do. And I always say and tell a story. It's like, on December 31st, you say, I'm going to have a great year. I'm going to go to the gym and get healthy this year. And they go out and buy a membership with all the right intentions. And they go 3 times the first week, twice the second week, once the third week, and then after they go sporadic back. Well, that's the coaching the mentor-mentee relationship between a boss and a subordinate today. It starts off well, but then they get distracted. Because they too are so involved in doing and leading that they don't make the time to really have dedicated mentor-mentee relationship, which is very different from having a casual conversation or having a one-to-one, right? And so how do we measure it? Right? Well, we start seeing that people leave organizations because they don't get their support, or we have a high turnover rate, or people don't perform to the level of expectations. Why? Is because they didn't get the support. It takes too long for them to get into the culture of the organization itself. So if you want to accelerate the performance of people, we have to think differently about it. Again, it starts on the day they get hired or the day they get promoted. If they get the right support systems with key performance indicators that it can be measured on a weekly basis, we can get these folks much quicker, into the next level of leadership, which of course comes with performance.
I just recently had a conversation with a business owner that said over the past several years that every person they've hired has started out really, really well, and by the end of a month or two, they're no good anymore. And I kind of, on one hand, ask the question: is there any common person that's been involved in every one of those transactions? And of course, the light bulb went off, and they said, "Well, me." That not me, but them. And so so many times I think we think there's something wrong with the world, but it's really in reality that we're not giving the time. Now, kind of thinking about time, I've often thought about healthcare, which is where you specialize. And healthcare is one of those industries that in reality, the doctors, the nurses, the people in the hospitals, maybe not so much in the doctor's office, but I think still there. You never know what's coming next. You don't know if you have a gunshot victim coming in, a car accident, a family that was in a car accident. So with that being said, how do you fit that into that type of job where there is an unknown, whether it be even in manufacturing, there can be unknowns that, it rains and you make concrete block, it rains and your material gets wet, and now you can't make the finished concrete block that you wanted to make. How do you work this into those types of situations?
So healthcare is unique, but you can see it in other places as well. But stuff happens. So as a mentor, I'm very flexible with my clients. Right, so they have a set schedule, but they sign up for a weekly 30-minute session. And they might text me or might not even text me saying, I cannot make it. Well, my response is I'm sure something more important came up. We booked for a later slot, or let me, because we need to meet them where they are. The key to performance is that they stick to the program of meeting once a week for 30 minutes. So you can have this ongoing dialogue and you take actionable steps that are building blocks to becoming that high performer. So yes, we have to adjust to what it is that the environment that they're working in. And it's about the client, not about me. But that's one of the reasons I always say is that, yes, we meet 30 minutes a week, but you can always text me and say, hey, Walter, do you have a minute? And you meet them in a moment. Again, this healthcare, I enjoy because it is something that is truly impactful. On the end of the day, it's always about the patient. Right? 90% of the front line reports to the middle manager. The middle manager gets the least amount of leadership development. They might go to that webinar or the conference or the learning module. The executive team have a checkbox. So it's a requirement that during commission to provide leadership development to your team members. They identify the top 1% of all of the leaders, and they send them up to these fancy classes or fellowship tracks. But the problem is that's 40 out of 6,000. Right? It is the people who actually do all of the hard work get the least amount of attention. So go back to where, why and how is that impactful? Well, who measures turnover rate? Right? In healthcare, turnover rate is 30%. Every single turnover costs you $75,000 for Frontline. And if it is somebody like a doctor, that could be several $100,000 to replace for a period of time. It is nowhere to be found on your P&L. So I always say, as soon as things, the margins are small in healthcare. So as soon as it gets squeezed, the place they start cutting is development of people. I say that's foolish, right? It's development of people is where you become better at cost management. You become better at transformation. You become better at quality and safety. So take that money and convert it to. So the upfront cost of mentorship of a person is rather inexpensive compared to the loss if only one of those people leaves the organization. So I think it is really important to, as a mentor, you have to be flexible in the environment you can work in, so you can meet the person where they're at. The key to performance is they have to do it on a weekly basis. There have to be small, actionable steps that can be measured. So I utilize a scorecard. I utilize the philosophy of people becoming, fully committed and fully accountable. I just do that process of learning to do the things you say you're going to do, and if you don't do them, there should be a countermeasure or an accountability to that as well. And that's been a successful formula for people.
So one of the things that I hear from time to time is an owner, a CEO, an HR director will say, if you point out to a business that it looks like you're having some turnover in an area, they may come back and say, but if you read the statistics in today's day and age, people don't stay at the same place for their entire career. So it's normal. I don't think there's anything wrong. That just people are leaving. What are your thoughts on that? And if that is true and people just are going to change jobs 8 times in their career, excuse me, can we try to extend that, by exercising good mentorship and good leadership? Can we extend that? So maybe instead of every 6 years having full turnover, it's every 12. What are your thoughts?
So you have to break down why people leave, right? You have to ask the question why. So I think a 10% turnover rate would be acceptable for any organization. But if you're at 30%, you have to ask yourself the question, why is that? So by asking doing an exit interview with everybody who leaves and really get to the root cause, is it for promotion? Is it for family? Is it for relocation? Is it for advancement? If you can identify why, then you can also solve around that problem. Again, the cost of turnover is exceptionally high to organizations. And we all know that millennials, the Zs, don't like to stick around for too long. It's not like people go to work and stay with the same organization for 30 years. That's in the past. But we can certainly do a better job. So one of the techniques that I teach, my folks, is to perform stay interviews. So you not only hire them, you get them to the first 90 days to make sure that they are fitting with it into the organization, but you continue to support them on a monthly or every 3 months minimally with a formal stay interview to make sure that they're still on track to becoming a contributing member of your team at large. Now, if they are leaders, not only do you stay interviews, but you also associate them with and connect them with a mentor. And that mentor can help monitor and support them. If you bring those things together and you develop advancement opportunities in the organization that they work in, listen, often people are willing to stay. But they're not willing to stay in the same job without the possibility of advancement more than 3 years.
Interesting. Now, how does that... you talk quite a bit about teams performing at the next level. So how does this then fit into building those teams and getting teams to perform at the next level? And then I'll have a follow-up question for that.
Sure. So in order to have a great team, you have to always start out with high. You have to have, the leader has to become more self-aware. They have to position themselves as a situational servant type of leader. They need to be able to really understand the fundamentals of what is the responsibility of a leader. How do I motivate? How do I inspire? And how do I build these lasting partnerships in my team as well as in an organization at large? But when it comes down to team performance, there are 5 key elements. Is that, do I have the right people in the right roles? And how do I evaluate that? And how do I correct for that? Making sure that the team is truly unified in their vision. Making sure that we have meaningful metrics attached to each team that is both the driving and the outcome metric. How do we have a cadence of accountability to make sure that we actually do the things we say we're going to do? And then do we take appropriate action? Now, those 5 things become the key to a high-performing team. Now, if you go back to the first step, having the right people on the right roles, well, I encourage you to perform, at least semi-annual Box 9 reviews of the team itself. Who are my high performer, high potential? What do I need to do them to recruit and re-recruit them and to make sure they have an opportunity to get to the next level? Where are my middle performers of the diamonds in the rough to the people who are just steady performers? But also, who are my underperformers? Not wait until they fall apart, but actively working on this. Does my team have the right attributes, skills, knowledge, and abilities to be able to perform on the level that I need them to perform? And if they don't, how can I as a leader provide gap closing measures to that? How can I bring the team together to have this unified vision? Make sure that we all sing off the same sheet of music. We're sitting in the same kayak, rowing in the same direction at the same speed with the same sense of purpose. How do I measure that? Right? And this is not about a monthly or update on the quality board, but how do I measure this on a daily basis and weekly basis? The key to success of a great team is not having too many measures. And that's another thing that we see, is that a lot of these teams are putting under such amount of pressure because they have 10, 15 KPIs. Impossible. Give them 2 or 3 things at best to work on, to find out which ones are the most important. And if you complete these well, will accelerate all the other measures as well. And it is through that process, you can do a lot more and to get the team to perform at a much higher level.
So it's not a great idea, excuse me, to give your team, a scorecard that has 86 different metrics on that you got to use a magnifying glass to be able to read what they are. That's not a great idea.
I think it is a brilliant idea if you want your team to fail.
I'm kind of laughing because we've all seen it, especially a big corporation or something, and they have a scorecard and it has every metric that's ever been designed since the inception of the business, and they're all on there, and everybody kind of picks which one they want to look at. So talking about those metrics and figuring out which ones they are, what is, for somebody that's thinking, oh wow, this is me, this is our company, where is someplace to start? How do you even start that conversation or that process of being able to figure out what metric is important to us, and how many companies are following the wrong metrics?
Too many. That's the second part of the question. I take it back to the leader first this way, and I go back to the I, and I'll ask the questions here. Give me something that you are struggling with that you really want to do for yourself. And I'll give you an example. You want to, read more, pray more, drink more water, go to the gym, exercise. Give me something that you work on. But let's say people will say exercise. Well, listen, I'm going to put on the board an outcome expectation that you're going to be exercising 5 days a week for 1 hour. That as a key performance indicator. I can say that all day long, and most people will never live up to that particular step. And that's what bosses do. They often give them measures that are not well thought out. They're so out of bounds that, and they don't follow up only until something breaks and say, how come you didn't do this? So I encourage people to take it back to using, the acronym SMART, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. So I want to go to the gym, create a very simple scorecard. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to do it 3 times a week for 20 minutes because that's the CDC minimum standard you should have. I'm going to do them Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm going to put it on my calendar from 8:30 to 9 o'clock on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And every day I'm going to measure myself if I performed up to that level, yes or no. Red, I didn't do it. Yellow, I sort of did it. Green, I did it well. And then you're going to measure to see how difficult it is for you to actually attain this level of self-accountability. You see yellows and reds, there needs to be a countermeasure. And by getting them first and understanding how difficult it is to be self-accountable, now they can translate that thinking into an action item for their team. And the key thing is not to find 5 or 6 things to work on with your team. Start very basic. Maybe 1, maybe 2 if the team is capable of doing that. But the most important thing is stop measuring outcomes. Start measuring drivers. And people say, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, think about it this way. When I stand on the scale in the morning, I look down at a number. That's an outcome. I can come back every day and look at that number. Maybe it's up, maybe it's down. But that's what we do in the industry all the time. We look at outcomes, usually on a weekly or monthly basis. But if it goes up and goes down, we don't understand why that is. And if we need to make it better, or let's say I want to lose weight, I need to think about it differently. So here it comes into play that I might think of I can drink more water, I can eat more food or less food, I can have more calories or fat or fibers. These 5 variables. Well, if I change all 5 of them right out of the gate, and my numbers go down, I can celebrate. Yes, I got this. But which one of the 5 caused my weight to go down? You don't know. Therefore, I need to continue to do all 5 of them. So the smarter way to do it is take one thing. So this week, I'm going to cut my calories by 500 calories per day, and every day I will measure my weight. And as I measure my weight and it goes down, now I see that eating less, that's the driver, is giving me the outcome that I see. And that philosophy, it needs to be put into the team itself. Find, what is the outcome that we desire? Now find the variable, the X variable. So in Six Sigma, we have a simple equation called Y equals the function of X. Now Y is not how many outcomes. Give me one outcome, right? And then which variable do I manipulate in order to measure if I can get close to the outcome? And the quicker the leader understands that, the better off the team will be. And you start with 1 or 2 measures, and then you can maybe add a few more to that. But you need to get them to the point of creating new normals. And this is a behavioral issue, right? We are so busy firefighting, putting out small little fires, that we rarely get to the root cause. And if we don't put it, if we put just a Band-Aid on it, we end up having to come back to that fire as it rekindles many times over. So it's the behavior of leadership that needs to change. Instead of putting Band-Aids on things, we need to understand the problem, fix the problem that it would cause, and then measure the outcome of whatever it we fix over a period of time to ensure that we have created a new normal. Creating a new normal takes 60 to 120 days. And until we get that right, until we really fully appreciate that, we tend to be firefighters and chasing numbers on a piece of paper and not quite understanding why they go up or why they go down.
And I think sometimes the firefighting, that is what is, unfortunately, young leaders kind of think being busy and constantly running around is what being a leader is about, as opposed to thinking forward, looking for the lead indicators rather than the lagging indicators and those types of activities. So if a young leader is thinking, I'm ready to take a step, I'm going to take my first management job or supervisory job, what is your first piece of advice to them?
I think the first piece of advice is the fact that they need to recognize that doing is not leading. So they have to understand when they go from a performer to a leadership role, they cannot do all of the jobs that they were doing. And because at some point in time you run out of capacity. We see this way too often. Right? Is that they don't place trust in people, they don't understand the art of delegation. And because of that, they end up doing it. So you say somebody who's working really, it's all over the place, they feel they're effective, but that's a sign of inefficiency. If I ask somebody how many hours a week do you work, I work 60, 70 hours a week. But to me, that is, somebody is mismanaging their time and the way they execute. So those are opportunities. But that's something that we see, and that's what I would recommend, is to really focus in on understanding what your day should look like. And a new leader should have some doing, some improvement, working on short-term improvements and opportunities, and looking a little bit into the future, and understanding that they need to shift to themselves to the right while they dial some things to their subordinates. And that is often very difficult to do first time. And by the way, I see this on the executive level.
So, interesting question, and I don't think I get myself in any trouble here. Nobody would figure out where it was. I saw a post on social media just yesterday, and it was a chief of police, and they posted a picture of the squad car out somewhere, and they posted this very long post saying that I don't often do this, but today I decided to go out on patrol in the squad car, and I think it's very important that all of my officers know that I can still do their job. And as I read that, I kind of started to contemplate in my mind, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. As the chief of police, I don't know that I want the chief of police out proving that he can still do their job. I want him aiding, leading, and helping them to do their job so well that he never has to go out. And I'm not suggesting that you can't ever do something once you're at the top, but what are your thoughts on that, having that mentality of, I just want everybody to know I can still do it?
So interesting. I work with chiefs of police on a regular basis. Again, my emergency background lends itself to that because I understand the command and control structure. And my philosophy is servant leadership. So I'm trying to bring a different leadership philosophy to the police department, which helps them in many ways. Having said that, so I would call it, so doing what he described is not necessarily the right way. But I would change the wording, communication to your team, that I'm going on the gamba. Instead of showing them that I can still do the job, go for a ride along and support them and listen to what is taking place on the front line. Not from a perspective of, let me see what you're doing wrong, but how can I better support you? It is important for the leaders to never lose touch of what is taking place in the front line. All right, so, and we have a formal term for that. Go to where the work is done. So all leaders on a regular basis should go to where the work is done. Now, the mistake that some leaders make, they go there and they find things that are wrong and become punitive, or they point that out. That's the mistake. You don't go and do that. You can still make observations, but bring it back to the squad leader and say, while I was on the ride along, I saw A, B, and C. Hey, how can we support this officer? How can we support the squad in order to correct this? This is not a behavior that represents our brand. But you don't do that right on the ride along, because then it becomes punitive. And it comes with a negative rather than a positive connotation. But going on the gamba is exceptionally important, but do it for the right reason.
Interestingly, I remember early on in my career, we installed safety cameras throughout a manufacturing plant. And one of my plant managers came to me one day and said, hey, we have an employee stealing nuts and bolts. And I said, well, how do we know that? And the manager said, well, I've been sitting here watching the cameras, to see what's going on out there. And I said, that's not what those cameras are for. I said, you go out in the plant floor, and when you can identify and see that someone is doing something wrong, then we can take corrective action if need be, but you need to be on the floor where the work is happening, not sitting in an office looking at a camera. And I kind of what just went through my mind as you described that, it's kind of that same idea. Yeah, we can be more efficient, but we're not leading unless we are there and not losing touch with what's happening. So excuse me, if folks are interested and they want to find out more about you and more about the Dutch Mentor, where would they find out more?
So I try to be, somebody that gives things, gives information and nuggets of information. So you can always find me on LinkedIn. Connect with me there. I post just about on a regular basis. Every week I will post a challenging article. There's something for you to think about. You can find me on YouTube at thedutchmentor.com, where I post on a very regular basis. Again, little nuggets of information, things to think about. And of course, I would invite you to come to my website at thedutchmentor.com. book a free strategy call. Let's have a conversation about your journey, about your team, about your organization. And again, it is not about me trying to sell things, but it is a conversation that we can talk about what would fit well for your team, for your organization to meet the needs and the outcomes that you desire. And then, of course, you have a choice on how you want to get on that journey.
Awesome. So as we come to a close, we ask all of our guests 3 questions, kind of rapid fire. The first question really is just out of many years of conversations from business owners, business leaders in the community saying something to the nature of, when I was in high school, we learned this, or they don't teach this, or when I'm hiring young people, they don't have this skill. So the question really is, if we could get all the school administrators across the world sitting in front of us, what is the one piece of advice that you would love to be able to give them of something they could add or include in a student's career so that we end up with more well-rounded, better prepared for the workforce students?
Okay. Well, we could have an hour-long conversation about this alone, right? But to bring it down to simple, I would encourage them to all write down a simple equation that performance or high performance equals the function of 2 things. One is a technical skill, and the second one is one's own behavioral capacity. Way too often we go back to retraining technical skills, or we ignore the behavior of the people or of self. I think in order to be able to be a high performer, you need to have good technical skills, but you also need to have the behavior of a good worker, who's on time, who delivers, who can be who can be critical of self, who's willing to make adjustment and go to change. Behavior is way too often ignored, but is a vital component. And I use the example of this: if somebody is a baseball player and they're batting a 200. Is that because they don't know how to hit a baseball? No. It's because something got in between their ears that prevents them from hitting that ball. Right? So look at your own behavior if you are not performing.
I like it. Second question is, what throughout your career has been that go-to book that you've continually went back to get good insights and valuable information?
Many of them, but I think there are 2 that stand out for me. Is that Going from Good to Great by Jim Collins is a phenomenal book, and there's a couple of things in there that really can drive home the point. But it's a great book. The other one is that I think that we always talk about what is the one thing you will never get back in life is time. So I love reading Eckhart Tolle. I would recommend anybody to read him as well, to get a better understanding on what it is to live in the now and all the opportunities that go by us because we're not paying attention. We're thinking about our past, we're worrying about the future, and we fail to see what is right in front of us. On my website, on the second about page, there's a reading list of about 5 or 6 books I recommend people to read. And again, I've written many books myself, and you can always pick up a copy that encompasses all their thoughts and philosophies as well.
Awesome. And both of those books are great books. I have both on my bookshelf as well. So last question. In today's ever-changing world of technology, what's your favorite and most useful piece of technology you use today?
Well, I mean, it would be a failure to say that I rock 3.0 or 4.0. If you are not utilizing AI on a daily basis, you will be left behind. So do yourself a favor, go online, take a class, start utilizing, understand what AI is, what it is, how it will impact your current role. We talk about working smarter, not harder. AI will be is something is here to stay. And you better catch up or you will be left behind.
I would agree. Well, Walter, thank you so much for joining us today. I had a lot of fun in the conversation, but thank you for taking a little time out of your day to give us some good insight into the Dutch Mentor.
A great pleasure. It was a fun conversation, and look forward to continue it online. And again, if anybody wants to reach out to me, welcome and a quick call about your journey.
Awesome. For our listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to check out our past episodes, and don't forget to follow us so that you get some alerts whenever the new episodes come out. Until next time, we appreciate you.